All right, well, welcome to part three of the discussion on this fascinating article by Hugh Cheape on the history of the pastoral pipes. Um, really digging in, delving deep into this, and what I'm doing. Please, if obviously this is part three, so will you please listen? If you're interested in this, please listen to part one and two first. I didn't think it'd take me 3 hours or 4 hours to do this, but I really wanted to turn this into a bit of a project because there's just so much stuff to sink our teeth into here, and there's loads of examples of tunes from the time, like mostly tunes from the 1700s, a little bit earlier, maybe even a little bit later here. And what I'm doing is, as they're referencing the names of tunes, I'm just doing quick YouTube searches on some of those tunes to play little examples of what he's talking about. So it just brings the whole lot to life and colour, and hopefully you'll get as much as I'm getting out of this article and learning a bit about the history of this instrument, the pastoral pipe, and you know the forerunner maybe to the uilleann pipe or the union pipes, and what we can learn from it, and the types of tunes that were played on the instrument. So I'm just going to jump straight back in from where I left off. We're up in Edinburgh town. We're in the sort of 1720s, and just as we left off on part two of it, I said I'd recap on a couple of tunes that were mentioned in the article that I've since found just teetering at just tailoring off towards the end of part two. There was a couple of tunes mentioned. We're in the sort of Scottish kind of folk. We're in the sort of Scottish folk song collection. That was kind of related to, like, it says here, songs drawn from wit and mirth for the Beggars' Opera were well known as Scottish, and it goes into naming a few of them, and it goes on to say other popular Scottish folk songs derived from William Thomson's Orpheus Caledonius, popular airs such as The Lass of Patey's Mill. So here's a little example of that song, The Lass of Patey's Mill.
Sae bonny, blithe and gay, in spite of all my skill, she stole my heart away. A tedden o' the hay, bare heated on the green, love made her locks did play, and one turned in hurry, without the help of art, like flowers that grace the wild, she did her sweets impart, whene'er she spoke or smiled. Her looks, they were so mild, free from affected pride. She me to love beguiled, I wished her for my bride, had I sufficient.
All right, so we carry on now with the article. Yeah, that was The Lass of Patey's Mill. Anyway, next part of the article, Edinburgh town. If John Gay's sources for the Beggar's Opera were published, inspiration for their use in ballad opera lay also in oral currency. In theatre or street, everyone could sing along to Lumps of Pudding or Lily Bolero. And John Gay's known sojourn in Edinburgh in 1729 must have convinced him of the currency of his Scottish airs. Alright, so I just think this is sort of interesting again, how different versions of songs, like it says there, like it said in the theatre or the street, everyone could sing along to Lumps of Pudding. Um, this just goes to show you the difference of a version of a song. Here's the more sort of, right, this is the one I look kind of least like Lumps of Pudding. It's a little bit sort of bawdy, I suppose, but so this is just listen to this version and then listen to the next version, which sounds really sort of Scottish or Irish by comparison. So here's Lumps of Pudding.
When I was in the low country, when I was in the low country, what slices of pudding and pieces of bread my mother gave me when I was in need. My mother, she killed a good fat hog, she made such puddings would choke a dog.
Alright, so that goes on like that, okay? But just listen to this version of it. This sounds absolutely stunning. All right, so on it goes. But yeah, so that the second version there, that was by a group called Hesperus, the early music ensemble, Scottish and Irish music from the earliest traditional sources. So a little bit of a plug there for that album. So yeah, that's the Lumps of Pudding. Then of course he mentioned Lily Bolero, and then just for the tune here, Lily Bolero. I think it's a very interesting background to the tune. I'm sure you know it now when I play it. It's you probably heard it in films or whatever like that. But just a little bit of a background to it. It says Henry Purcell composed the melody of Lily Bolero for a march in 1686. The melody is found in the quick step. So what does it say? So he composed this as a march in 1686. But what's interesting here is before that the term itself, Lily Bolero, was sort of interesting. It says in 1686, Lord Thomas Wharton composed lyrics for Purcell's tune. The rakish Wharton was satirising King James II's appointment of Richard Talbot, the first Earl of Tyrconnell, as the Lord Deputy of Ireland. Wharton's conceit is a sarcastic conversation between two Irishmen about the imminent arrival of the Catholic Talbot and its dire implications for the Protestants. Lily Bolero was the watchword used by Irish Catholics during the Irish Rebellion of 1641. The song initially made very little impression on the public. However, when James II began transferring Irish regiments to England in 1688, broadsides of the lyrics were printed and Lily Bolero became immensely popular by October. It spread as a popular street song in English towns and especially inside English barracks to mock the arriving Irish regiments. The next month, William of Orange invaded, and Lily Bolero became even more commonplace. Even the palace guards, supposedly loyal to James II, were heard singing it. A second part was published to the song as William advanced. The language of the second part is even rougher, as two Irish soldiers stationed in England pine for home, since the English hate them anyway. Yeah, so here's just a small little example of it. This would be played like as it was played by the army, drum, fifes and drums. Yeah, so you get an idea of it there, and just a little bit more extra meaning towards it. It says the background of it as well. The first Irish Roman Catholic to serve as Lord Deputy of Ireland in nearly 200 years. Talbot quickly filled the army in Ireland with Catholic officers. Hence, there's a phrase, "we will have commissions galore," and recruits, alarming the Protestants and raising the hopes of the Irish Catholic community for a restoration of their lands and political power. So don't forget, like, we're back in the, like 1680s, 1686. So anyway, it's when Richard Talbot was appointed the Lord Deputy of Ireland, then it obviously raised the Catholic hopes, for a restoration of their lands and political power. Created fear among Irish Protestants of a massacre similar to which had happened in the Irish Rebellion of 1641. So I see the massacre of 1641 was still fresh in people's minds. It was only about 40 years earlier. The song parodies the widespread Irish belief in prophecy. There's a line in the song that says, "There was an old prophecy found in a bog that Ireland would be ruled by an ass and a dog." Talbot, as well as being a name, is a breed of a hound or a hunting dog. A common theme of such prophecies was that the foreigners would be driven out of Ireland in some decisive battle. If you look at the siege of Limerick for an example of these attitudes, the song's title and the words of the refrain seem or have been interpreted as a garbled version of the Irish words Lille Barlere Balin an La. Lily was clear and ours was the day. The lily may be a reference to the fleur de lis of France, or to the most celebrated astrologer of the mid-17th century, William Lilly, who became well known for prophecy in his time and who could readily be attributed foreknowledge that a Catholic would be the King of England. Alternatively, the lyrics could mean Lily is clear about this and the day is ours. It is also thought that Lily is a familiar form of William, and that Bolero comes from the Irish Bull Lero, which gives William defeated all that remained. Professor Brendan O'Bucla has claimed that they are a garbled version of the Irish sentence Lero Lero Lille Bolero Bulin an La, which means manifest, 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 Lily will be manifest, the day will be ours, referring to the possible prophecy of an Irish victory by the astrologer William Lilly. Right, so it's an interesting history of the tune. Yeah, like it appears to have started off as a marching tune, and then words were put to it about the appointment of Richard Talbot as the Lord Deputy, the first Roman Catholic in 200 years. But then it turned into like a satire of that, and it kind of raised fears of a Roman Catholic kind of resurgence and its dire implications for the Protestants. Um, and then, as it says here, it spread as a popular street song in English towns and especially inside English barracks to mock the arriving Irish regiments. Um, uh, and then, with the arrival of William of Orange, Lily Bolero became more commonplace. So I suppose the whole song is supposed to be a mockery of this thing, and to sort of store up the fears of a Catholic resurgence. Yeah, interesting, very interesting. So then it was adapted for the Beggar's Opera. Like it says, Purcell's music provided the tune for The Highwayman, Macheath's satire on the modern society in John Gay's The Beggar's Opera, which premiered in 1728, using popular folk tunes for its score. So then you put lyrics to that for The Beggar's Opera. Then it says, the Protestant boys, there's a tune from Ulster Protestant folk lyrics called The Protestant Boys. Here's one version of it. The Protestant boys are loyal and true, stout-hearted in battle and stout-handed too. The Protestant boys are true to the last, and faithful and peaceful when danger has passed. And oh, they bear and proudly wear the colours that floated o'er many a fray. When cannon was flashing and sabres were clashing, the Protestant boys still carried the day. Another version of it, Nottingham Ale, is an English drinking song sung to the tune of Lily Bolero. Then even over to America, another set of lyrics set to the tune at the time of the American Civil War. It's about, they just basically changed the words of it for the American Civil War, Uncle Sam and all of this. So very interesting air, very interesting words, and what it has stored up in people down the years. So here's one last version of it. Alright, so look, that's a good bit there in Lily Bolero. Anyway, so let's get back to the thing. It says, in the theatre or on the street, everyone could sing along to The Lumps of Pudding or Lily Bolero. And John Gay's known sojourn in Edinburgh in 1729 must have convinced him of the currency of the Scottish airs. As a protege of Lady Catherine Hyde, the Duchess of Queensberry, he is said to have visited Edinburgh many times, to have been lodged in Queensberry House in the Canongate, and to have frequented Jenny Has Change House across the street. He also used to visit Alan Ramsay's shop in Creeksland in the High Street, a meeting place of the capital's wits, where he was remembered, quote, the late William Titler, Esquire of Woodhouse-Lee had frequently seen Gay among these literary gossips, and described him as a pleasant-looking little man with a toy wig. He recollected overhearing him desire Ramsay to explain many of the Scottish words and allusions to national customs that occur in The Gentle Shepherd, which he engaged on his return to England to communicate to Pope, who was already an admirer of the beauties of that fine pastoral. Allan Ramsay, the poet, bookseller, and wig maker, was already well known and published by the time of the appearance of the Beggar's Opera. Ramsay himself collected songs and wrote words for them, and published a selection, but without the music, in the Tea Table Miscellany, first published in 1724. This was a successful venture and ran finally to 18 editions, subtly aimed at the parlours of polite society and modern manners of taking tea. His Gentle Shepherd predated this, but was performed as a pastoral play, only with the spoken word and no music. Following a production of the ballad opera in Edinburgh in 1729, Ramsay's play was re-versioned with music drawn on Scottish folk song. This in turn was produced in London in Drury Lane in the following year, adapted by Theophilus Kibber as Patty and Peggy or the Fair Foundling, Gay's sequel to the Beggar's Opera, Polly, an opera. Then captivated the town when the libretto was prohibited by the Lord Chamberlain. However, it was published and sold in 1729 and went on to be published in Dublin in 1730 and in 1735, where again folk music was introduced to the stage. Many ballad operas were produced, particularly between 1728 and 1733, but the genre seemed to be exhausted and nothing lived up to the 1728 production, which continued to be restaged. One or two were built on a Scottish folk storyline, such as Patty and Peggy, Flora or Hob in the Well, and the Highland Fair or the Union of the Clans. But it was the music that sustained audience demand. Of the 27 pieces of music and melodies used in Polly and opera, for example, over half were Scottish or identified with Scotland and appeared in Orpheus Caledonius, testifying to the continuing and extraordinary popularity of Scottish music as a form in the neo-Baroque. The market success of Ramsay's Scottish songs and the subscription lists of William Thomson offer also a convincing measure of musical taste and interest in the early 18th century, and of the appeal of traditional music to polite and professional society. The decade or so from 1728 saw a synthesis of the traditional and classical in music through the medium of drama, and the possible emergence of the pastoral pipe as an unexpected acolyte in the Temple of Apollo. Classical formats were published in words and basses or catches for German flutes and a bass. But if Hogarth or our anonymous artist is to be believed, the gentrified bagpipe added a particular piece of exotica for metropolitan audiences. So that little sentence there really sort of sums it up and says it all there for me. The gentrified bagpipe. So obviously in this kind of Baroque period, there was an appeal for that, as I keep on saying, that kind of rustic, that kind of pastoral kind of setting and folk moods and folk songs, and based on traditional melodies which would have been played on folk and rustic kind of instruments. But this here we have here a gentrified bagpipe, so it's a much more now refined instrument that's being made to be played with groups of other musicians for the stage in London and Dublin and Edinburgh and all around these two islands. So it's really a refined bagpipe, kind of based on basically something more traditional or archaic, I suppose. The cultural tone of the early 18th century Scotland was set by the Revolution settlement of 1690, which appeared to set up the Presbyterian Church in an unassailable position in its control of the moors of Scotland. This was an outcome of the glorious revolution of the preceding year and the considerable disruption to public life ensuing. The onset of severe famine in 1692 may help to explain the remark of John Clerk of Pennyquick about the cultural state of Scotland. Little wonder that the opera was infrequent before the second half of the 18th century, and attempts to set up theatres in Glasgow, Aberdeen and Dundee were so vigorously opposed that at first they failed to flourish. An orthodoxy inherited from the 17th century expected piety and proper religious observance, and the established church defined offences against doctrine and discipline in numerous acts of assembly. These were enforced energetically by the church courts of kirk session and presbytery, and clergy as well as laity were prosecuted. Typically, conformity excluded music making and dancing, and all boisterous social gatherings, such as the ever popular penny weddings or penny bridals. Robert Wadrow, chronicler of the Covenanting movement, recounted sourly how in August of 1728, quote, a company of strollers and comedians came to Glasgow to act the Beggar's Opera. The magistrates were applied to for a room, and Bailey Murdoch, who is too easy, as is said, by a mistake, gave a kind of allowance of the Wayhouse to act in. They acted 2 or 3 days and had very few except the first day. After that, they got not so much as to pay their music. Unquote. Alan Ramsay opened the theatre in 1736 in Carruber's Close on the north side of the High Street in Edinburgh, but it was closed within 6 months due to the hostility of the church. But in spite of this determined suppression, theatre and concerts were becoming popular, and the rigid opposition of the church weakening, or customary church censure withering, before the climate of public opinion. Contemporary enthusiasm for the production of Reverend John Hume's Douglas in the Canongate Playhouse in 1756 has been identified by historians as signalling the triumph of moderatism over the stricter attitudes of evangelism. It was also the decade of mid-century when more beneficial effects of the Union began to be felt. The play was condemned by the Presbytery of Edinburgh. Reverend Alexander Carlyle, describing their stance, quote, the high-flying set were unanimous against it, as they thought it a sin for a clergyman to write any play, let it even so moral in its tendency, unquote. Many members of the establishment, including clergymen, visited the theatre, and when Carlyle himself defied the summons to appear before the Presbytery to answer for his conduct, the case ultimately was dropped. Theatre in Scotland became an acceptable entertainment, and Carlyle described how rapidly mores were modified. He says, it is remarkable that in the year 1784, when the great actress Mrs. Siddons first appeared in Edinburgh during the sitting of the General Assembly, that court was obliged to fix all its important business for the alternate days when she did not act, as all the younger members, clergy as well as laity, took their stations in the theatre on those days by 3 in the afternoon. The St. Celia's Day concert of 1695 is recorded in detail and marks a significant point in the emergence of concert performance in Scotland. The order of the instrumental music for the feast of St. Celia on the 22nd of November 1695 seems to belie absolutely any sense of Scotland falling behind in the arts, although economic affairs were suffering severe downturn. The orchestra consisted of more than 30 performers, of whom were 19 gentlemen of the first rank and fashion, supported by 11 professors or masters of music. Perhaps significantly, the proportion of gentlemen amateur to professional musicians is greater than in comparable London circles, and this seems to set the tone for 18th century music making in Scotland. Lack of currency, of course, meant that the prospects were poor for southern and continental professionals. The programme was almost exclusively Italian, but the interests of participants included folk songs. General John Middleton, whose instrument was the flute, sung a song with much humour, which he sometimes accompanied with the key and tongs, evidently his party piece, and one of the German professors gave benefit concerts in which his female pupils performed. Two of the girls were remembered as they were both finer performers on the harpsichord. Their excellence lay in the genuine performance of Scots songs, which they sung in a plain but fine taste, and accompanied by a thorough bass. In spite of clerical disapproval, unsteady patronage, and the changing political scene around the union of the parliaments, music making continued in Edinburgh, as Alan Ramsay's eloquent To the Music Club of 1721 piquantly witnesses. Oblique comment is offered perhaps on the export of Scottish music in your country's fame, but he pursues his claim for the native idiom of national song in words which remarkably prefigure performance and fashion in the next generation, including the recherché reference to piping. Quote, and shew that music may have as good faith in Albion's glens as Umbria's green retreat, and with Coralie's soft Italian song, mix Cowden Nels and winter nights are long, nor should the martial pibroch be despised, owned and refined by you, these shall the more be prized. The Musical Society of Edinburgh's concerts began in St Mary's Chapel in Niddry Wynd in 1728 with a membership fee of 1 guinea per year. Though exclusive, membership included the Edinburgh professional and merchant classes, many of whom were string and woodwind players and formed the orchestras. The motetti of Bassani and the sonatas of Corelli were said to summarise their music, but the native idiom, particularly in the form of Ramsay's Scots songs, were added to their programmes and was adopted by the professors. Whether this was individual taste and preference or was market-driven remains a matter of speculation. The Italian master of music, Francesco Barsanti, printed a collection of Scottish tunes with figured basses in Edinburgh in 1742, called A Collection of Old Scots Tunes. His selection of 30 tunes must represent the core Scottish repertoire of the day and also the triumph of the Scottish musical tradition in the neo-Baroque. Edinburgh concert programmes for August of 1752 and January of 1754 included Signora Passarini's Scots songs, Tweedside and The Bush Aboon Traquair, set in parts by Signor Geminiani. Yeah, well, okay, we had the beautiful tune Tweedside earlier on, but here's a small extract out of The Bush Aboon Traquair, if I'm spelling that right. or pronouncing it right, Traquair. Okay, so then the article goes on. A benefit concert for Niccolo Pasquali, who lived from 1718 to 1757, on the 17th of January 1754, included his new cantata Tweedside, newly set in the Italian manner for the sake of variety, by Signor Pasquali, with various symphonies of violins and flutes. Music in the provinces. Aberdeen and Glasgow also hosted concerts and music societies, and their citizens demonstrated great enthusiasm for music making. Glasgow's 18th century cultural life has suffered for being too readily compared to Edinburgh, and Alexander Jupiter Carlyle's caustic comment allowed to stand. Quote, "It must be confessed that at this time in 1743 they were far behind in Glasgow, not only in their manner of living, but in those accomplishments and that taste that belongs to people of opulence, much more to persons of education." Unquote. Following a series of cutting social judgments on its citizens, he supplies an important insight into public music making which might have included pipers. Quote, "There never was but one concert during the 2 winters I was at Glasgow, and that was given by Walter Scott, Esquire, of Harden, who was himself an eminent performer on the violin, and his band of assistants consisted of 2 dancing school fiddlers and the town waits." Unquote. Aberdeen, whose musical society was founded in 1748, is a particularly important case because of its distinctive blend of humanism, a conservative background of episcopacy, the 2 music schools of St. Nicholas and St. Machars, an inheritance of a big house court culture, and a rural hinterland which boasted the richest ballad tradition in Scotland and beyond. Aberdeen was the source of the first published secular music in Scotland, the Forbes Cantus of 1662, whose preface confidently claimed the city as the sanctuary of the sciences, the manse of the muses, and the nursery of all the arts. Corelli and Scarlatti were as revered here as elsewhere, but in practical terms Aberdeen was not a destination for many continental masters of music. An evident individuality of taste might disapprove of overly figuring and embellishing settings, and Reverend John Skinner of Linshart expressed the general disapproval of Italianate and French styles in his famous song Tulloch Gurrum, to the tune of the same name. Okay, so it mentions the song there, Tulloch Gurrum, in which John Skinner expressed the general disapproval of Italianate and French styles, right? So Tulloch Gurram. So here's a nice version of Tulloch Gurram. First of all, sung, and then I'll play a little bit of the pipes version of it. But it's a catchy sort of a tune. And I suppose it's capturing that sentiment of it disapproves of the sort of Italian and kind of French stuff, and maybe it's looking more towards our own kind of music maybe. So here we go. Here's a bit of Tulloch Gurram by Dougie MacLean.
He's a song Montgomery cried in me. A dispute's always silent nonsense. It's for folks to chide for what's been done afore them. At Whig and Tory all agree. Whig and Tory, Whig and Tory, Whig and Tory all agree to drop the Whig McMorrum. At Whig and Tory all agree to spend the snick with mirth and glee and cheerful sing along with me the real Tulloch Gurram. O Tulloch Gurram's my delighted gars, I saw a name unite, and only some that keeps up spite and conscience I abhor him. Blithe and merry ways be all, blithe and merry, blithe and merry, blithe and merry ways be all, to mark a cheerful quorum. Blithe and merry ways be all, as long as we hae a breath to draw and dance till we be like for the real Tulloch Gurram. Let one reminds themselves oppressed with fear, so wanton double cess, and so he solves themselves distress with keeping up decorum. So we say sour and sulky sit, sour and sulky, sour and sulky, sour and sulky shall we sit, like all philosophorum. Shall we say sour and sulky sit, with neither sense nor mirth nor wit, and canna raise to shake a bit of the real Tulloch Gurram.
Anyway, there's the song version of Tulloch Gurram. Here's a bit of a piping version. Alright, that was Tulloch Gurram there. That was performed by Seudan, Seudan. I think if it's same as an Irish Gaelic, shade means to blow. Shade, yeah, Tanguig shade. The wind is blowing. So Seudan, I'm sure means blowing in Scots Gaelic. That's my best guess. Tulloch Gurram, just for anyone that wants to know what that means, Tulloch generally means sort of a hillock or a rise, like not a major big hill, just a sort of a small hill. And Gurram means blue. So the blue hill, Tulloch Gurram, but now not necessarily like as in royal blue or sky blue or whatever. It can mean that kind of bluey, kind of misty colour, that sort of dark kind of colour, like shade of kind of, you know, in a landscape type of thing. So it kind of means the blue hill, the dark kind of hill, the Tulloch Gurram. Like, anyway, we got on with the article. Aberdeen as a cultural centre therefore demonstrates distinctive characteristics which offer perhaps some explanation of an evident survival of the pastoral and union pipe tradition in northeast Scotland. In terms of the material culture, the final chapter of the organology of the pastoral pipe may belong to the northeast. Niccolo Pascali's setting for the folk song Tweedside in 1754, For the Sake of Variety, seems to set the tone for Scotland's Baroque or Neo-Baroque and the concept of changing fashion. In the 1740s, John Geoghegan wrote about the pastoral pipe, quote, "Those of good genius who are disposed to play this instrument may be able to improve the music of it very much beyond what at present it is," unquote, suggesting that a new instrument and a new technique adopted from a shawm and oboe would enable players to extend the range and thus the repertoire of bagpipe and bring it into the orchestra. So this is really getting to the key, down into the heart of the matter here, the nitty gritty of it. Like that, like he says, like a new bagpipe. Like he says, this is Geoghegan now. A new instrument, a new technique would enable the players to extend the range and thus the repertoire. Geoghegan says, those of good genius who are disposed to play this instrument may be able to improve the music of it very much beyond what at present it is. So this is an actual deliberate improvement on the instrument, which proves that there was an instrument there in the first place. Just a second now. Yeah, I think that's critical to the whole point of this, of the, he calls, when he said, may be able to improve the music of it very much beyond what at present it is, suggesting that a new instrument and a new technique adopted from a shawm and an oboe would enable players to extend the range and thus the repertoire of the bagpipe and bring it into an orchestra. So that's the whole crux of this matter. Like, what came first? Like, was this just a newly invented instrument, or was it an improvement on an existing instrument? I'm firmly of the opinion that it was an improvement on an existing instrument, an evolution, a very much a deliberate evolution by a very sophisticated type of people and sophisticated musicians and instrument makers of the Baroque period. The author refers in passing to the addition of keys to the pipe chanter. In the Jacobite ballad, The Piper of Dundee, the piper is described as playing a continental tune. Quote, "A spring brent new free yont the seas," and then playing another key. His ballad has credibly been attributed to James Hogg, 1770 to 1835. So here's a bit of a clip out of that song, The Piper of Dundee, and crucially he says, a spring brent new free yont the seas, and then playing another key. So just have a little listen to that.
The piper came to Urton, the piper came to Urton, and he played bunnily. He played a spring the laird to please, a spring brent new free on the seas, and then he gave his bags a wheeze and played another key. And West me he a drogie, a drogie, a drogie, and West me he a drogie, the piper o' Dundee. And West me he a drogie, a drogie, a drogie, and West me he a drogie, the piper o' Dundee. He played the welcome o'er the main, and ye's before and as before, and all Stuart back again with muckle mirth and glee. And Wesley he a rogie, a rogie, a rogie.
So that's The Piper of Dundee. That was sung there by Ewan MacColl. And that was from the album The Jacobite Wars of 1715 and 1745, Songs of the Two Rebellions. But anyway, it says the ballad has credibly been attributed to James Hogg, 1770 to 1835. but musical metaphor for political allegory may still be significant. Popular music making, as later evidenced by a voluminous chapbook literature, could hold a mirror to political life. The piper who could play in neither key might survive in the spoils system, which then came to control Scottish politics. The fortunes of the bagpipe and popular music making, lacking generous narrative source material of its own, might be better reconstructed with a clearer understanding of the changes and chances of political life. Edinburgh, where the earliest reference to bagpipe makers in Scotland occur, offers a good starting point. According to a spectator who went to live there in 1774, Edinburgh was the seat of several of the most ingenious men in Europe, and a thoroughfare into all Scotland. Edinburgh, town and gown, was at the heart of the Scottish Enlightenment, with its intensive and extensive philosophical inquiries into the nature of society. It was also a centre of British political power following the rise of management and the control of Scotland by the Campbells of Argyll, and then by the Lord Advocate Henry Dundas. The exercise of power through control of the electorate and resort to expedients then replaced party politics and Jacobite intrigue. The backdrop to cultural life comprised the Hanoverian monarchy, parliament and courts, changing patterns of trade and commodities, the experience of a global war, and the quarrel with the American colonies, and all these are glimpsed and reflected in changing social structure and fashion. Emancipation from too close clerical control may have added dancing to church-going as participatory entertainment, and certainly dancing became more fashionable than theatre, and Domenico Corri a hero of the hour in the 1770s. A spectator, journalist and playwright, Edward Topham, who lived from 1751 to 1820, described one aspect of fun and fashionable life in 1775 and hinted at the blending of musical instruments as Carlyle had described fiddlers and town waits in Glasgow 30 years earlier. You know, 'tis a custom in London for some of the principal dancing masters to have balls for their benefit, but here it is a general thing, from the one most in vogue to the humble teacher of a reel to the drone of a bagpipe. Each has his ball and his public at a particular season of the year in the assembly room. The dancing masters enliven the entertainment by introducing between the minuets their high dances, which is a kind of double hornpipe, in the execution of which they excel perhaps the rest of the world. I wish I had it in my power to describe to you the variety of figures and steps they put into it. Besides all those common to the hornpipe, they have a number of their own which I never before saw or heard of. So amazing is their agility, that an Irishman who was standing by me the other night could not help exclaiming in his surprise that, by Jesus, he never saw children so handy with their feet in all his life. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that for part 3 because we're just approaching on an hour there. I hope you enjoyed that and got a bit out of it. A few more tunes and a bit of cultural kind of context into what life was like, I suppose, in the Baroque period, and comparisons to kind of, you know, the Beggar's Opera and the Italian stuff and the French stuff and Baroque court entertainment and kind of Scottish Enlightenment and everything else. Yeah, part 4 will be the final part. I see there's not much left to go on for part 4. Probably another hour, as I kind of predicted. I'd say this will take 4 hours, hour-long episodes altogether. So, for part four, it seems to be getting more back. The article seems to be getting more back to the actual instrument itself, because it starts off with performers and makers, and it goes on about just that, performers and makers of the instrument, and I expect it'll give us a bit more details on that, on the detailed descriptions of the instruments and the makers and where they were from, and maybe the background society behind that, and hopefully possibly a few more tunes as well. I'm hoping that you're enjoying the tunes. I know I said in the beginning I wasn't going to play every tune, but I just thought, like, you know what, it gives us a much more kind of colourful kind of description of, in our heads, of what they were listening to. Sometimes I just think if you hear like lists of names of tunes, it doesn't really mean much to you. But then when you start to play them here, and look, all of them aren't on YouTube. A lot of them are. The ones I kind of found I played for is, for me anyway, gave me a better insight into what they were actually listening to, and quite, I like a lot of it. Some of them I'm not so mad about, but like, that's like any type of music, like, like today or any other time, we hear stuff that we're not so mad about. Same here with this, but then I'm discovering a few little gems that I wouldn't have come across, and even groups and performers of those songs and tunes that I'm finding here on YouTube. It's a gift that, like, I would have never gone down that avenue. I've written down a few names of the bands and the groups and the names of these tunes that I've liked, which I'll certainly go off and learn at some point. So yeah, so anyway, I hope you're enjoying this so far, and see you in part 4. Thanks for listening.